Okay. Hello. It's Thursday night for me, 8:39 p.m. And I'm recording my video lecture for 2001, Space Odyssey. But since this is our first example of science fiction, let me talk a little bit about our romance science fiction. What's unique as we move to science fiction is we're now moving to a genre that has no clear antecedents prior to the 19th century. You could go all, I mean, some people have argued you could go all the way back to Gulliver's Travels, and that's proto science fiction. That Gulliver goes to the land of the Lilliputs and the Brobdingnags and the Winhams, three different lands, one where everybody's a giant, and then another one where he's a giant and they're all tiny, and a third one where almost a version of Planet of the Apes, where the horses are the dominant species, and men in fact are called yahoos, which is, or yahoo.com, I guess, if they knew it or not, is where they got their name. And the Winhams are they're like Dr. Spock. They're purely rational, the horses that run everything, and they see the yahoos as irrational beings who will never be capable of being a dominant species. So it's clearly social satire. And Thomas More wrote a book called Utopia, where he tried to envision a perfect world, and so that too is seen as some kind of proto science fiction. But in a lot of ways, those are closer to fantasy, with the possible exception of Gulliver's Travels, which, especially the land of the Winhams, does have a feel of. Swift is basically saying that human beings are too irrational to be a dominant species. Of course they are. So then he imagines a place where they're not. And Planet of the Apes owes something to this, where Charlton Heston, in the original at least, lands on a planet where it's the apes that evolved. But he finds out toward the end of that movie, spoiler alert, that actually humans at one point had been a dominant species, but they caused a nuclear war. So at the very end of this, he finds a Statue of Liberty, or a piece of the Statue of Liberty, just half buried in the sand, and he's like, "Oh, I can't believe you guys, you did it." So it isn't that the apes evolved and humans didn't. It's the humans evolved and then destroyed their own culture, and out of the post-apocalypse, the apes became the dominant species. So a little different than the Winhams, and rather indicative of what science fiction became after World War II, where it was very hard to find any science fiction that didn't at least address nuclear holocaust as a possibility. I mean, even movies like Godzilla, which initially came out of Japan. Godzilla is clearly an allegory for nuclear holocaust. I mean, even in the plot line, we're told he's this monstrous city-destroying beast that is awakened by nuclear tests. But this, of course, coming out of a country that had suffered Hiroshima and Nagasaki, so they deal with it. They allegorize it, and Godzilla does seem more science fiction than horror, because it's centered around the unintended effects of technology. And there's certainly this hybrid. Movies like Alien and Aliens have a certain hybridity, caught somewhere between horror and science fiction. Same with Frankenstein, which Mary Shelley's Frankenstein clearly comes out of a Gothic tradition, not unlike Dracula, except that Dracula, it doesn't rely on technology. I mean, he sucks other people's blood. Frankenstein is quite different, and you have a stronger allegorical component in Frankenstein, because the monster, who's not called Frankenstein, he's simply called the monster, is Victor Frankenstein's invention. And very early on, Mary Shelley has identified what will be a dominant theme in what will become science fiction, and typically Frankenstein is seen as the beginning, where the step out of the Gothic, out of horror, and that you stepping out of horror, you have to step into technology. So the horror and romance, they go all the way back to thousands of years. You can find romances, and you can find Gothic or horror. Beowulf's a horror movie in a lot of ways. So what's different is that science fiction centers technology, the science as the dominant discourse, and then everything is secondary to that. So that makes it unique, because there really isn't technology in Gulliver's Travels. There's a lot of social satire, but there aren't a lot of like weird inventions that it isn't until Jules Verne, late, and H.G. Wells, where you begin to get the flying saucers, and also in thinking about things that had not been invented yet, like submarines, the Nautilus, which could cruise around, underwater, or around the world in 80 days in a hot air balloon. So Jules Verne was very interested in what became known as speculative fiction, a kind of subgenre within science fiction, where you try and speculate based on what's already present, what might happen. And then, roughly speaking, science fiction gets divided into utopic or dystopic. But that's kind of a false, misleading binary, because science fiction is pretty much always dystopic, because it has a strand of the utopic in it. But in fact, the paradox of science fiction is that the pursuit of the utopic brings on the dystopic. Even something like The Matrix, which we'll see later, the pursuit of what machines can do, or even AI, artificial intelligence, it overshoots the mark. And the Matrix, which is also owes a debt to Hal in 2001. At what point do the machines take that next step? And we'll see this in Blade Runner as well. And in a sense, make a move to become the dominant species. It's interesting to look at science fiction right now, because with the vaccinations and COVID, there in the undergraduate conference the other day that we had, this whole issue, do you trust the science? Now that seemed like a no-brainer, especially when Trump was in charge, since he kind of only did, the only thing he pursued was his own corruption. So it seemed clear that we needed to, quote unquote, trust the science. But it's amazing we can still say that. I mean, it's not that science it betrays us. We betray ourselves with science. Jonathan Swift's right. There's a strand of irrationality in us that is not going away. And the scientific method is very good at compartmentalizing the irrational. I mean, it has no place in the scientific method. You're supposed to be objective. It's double-blind studies, and this works, but it's not perfect. And obviously, the fact that the atomic bomb is the result of the scientific method, it was a kind of, and Kubrick had already done his movie Dr. Strangelove, or How I Learned to Stop Worrying and Love the Bomb, which was this parody of nuclear geopolitics. What science fiction, let me put it this way. Here's a soundbite for you. Science fiction emerged as a new genre because science is fiction. So science fiction keeps pointing out that science is still fiction. It's not a novel, but it's still fiction in the sense that it is an arrangement of the human intellect. And so there is a fictional component to science. There is a part of science that we simply make up. when we don't have all the answers. We were talking about psychotropic drugs, I think, in the open classroom the other day, and maybe the other class. But it's so often you have a drug that's been approved for the market, it's been tested, the side effects are within normal range, but they frequently say scientists are not yet clear what the mechanism is, or the somewhat amusing feature that Viagra was supposed to be a heart medication, and it wasn't working out as a heart medication. And then it was observed that it had this effect on the male blood vessels, and was potentially would help, particularly when aging, for male virility and so-called erectile dysfunction. Although it's curious that before there was a cure for like erectile dysfunction, so to speak, there was no phrase erectile dysfunction. You were older. So it was either psychological or it's because you were older. So Viagra seemed to roll that back, that being older needn't be the explanation if you can use the Viagra. But then in order to market the Viagra, and I'm not saying this is wrong, everyone needs to make their own choices. Then they had to have a dysfunction. So suddenly being older and having issues with male performance was a dysfunction. So it's in other words, it stigmatizes it. And that's one of the issues with science sometimes, is when it invents something, quote, new, it needs to rearrange what's already there. And I think we talked about this in the open classroom again extensively, but the issue, we are moving into an age of economics, and we're solidly in that. And now in 1968, when Kubrick is filming 2001: A Space Odyssey, the moon race with Russia was in full tilt. The Russians launched the first satellite, Sputnik, which actually went over the United States because it was circling the globe, and that was seen as surveillance. I don't think Sputnik could surveil much at all, but it did literally cross over America. It quote unquote invaded America, but it wasn't really America's borders, because it was at the outer edge of orbit, and it was clear that space, was the final frontier, as Star Trek will famously put it. And that's how the U.S. immediately saw it, that they'd already settled the West, so now it was time to go up, having already gone west, and race the Russians to the moon. I think a lot of people thought this some people thought this was militarily important, that if the Russians got a base on the moon in 1968, they might figure out how to rain down nuclear bombs. I don't think the Russians or the American scientists thought that anybody had nearly the ability to do anything like that. So it also became a communism versus capitalism, which government / economic system would be capable of the hundreds of millions of dollars that would have to go into the space program, who had the better education system, who could push the early computers that Turing had barely invented at the end of World War II, mostly to figure out how to break the German code, which they did. And we are talking about going to the moon again just recently, and this time we are talking about setting up a base and doing something else. I don't think anyone expected that we'd go from 1968 to 2020 without any other serious manned expeditions to the moon. But I think we thought, at least when I was growing up, because I saw the moon landing on TV like so many people as teenagers. The way it was billed was, one small step for man, one giant leap for mankind. It was kind of clever, and everyone thought that's what we were talking about, that this was a breakthrough. And then nothing, and then crickets. I mean, there were a couple other attempts, and then we moved to the space shuttle. Then there was the space shuttle disaster, which really crimped that. And now we got Elon Musk trying to figure out how to launch a Mustang convertible into orbit. So the kids have gotten a big enough budget to to do space travel. Musk wants to arrange some kind of group to Mars somehow. So in terms of just to contrast with horror and romance, that what do you not get in science fiction? Let's start with that. You don't get romance for sure. I mean, nobody's in love in 2001. Social relations are barely registered. We see one of the astronauts, doing what we'd now call FaceTiming, which in 1968 was a fantasy, talking to his kid. And saying, did you get the birthday present? Daddy's traveling, and is mommy there? Mommy's in the bathroom. It's hard to read what's going on. But it's on the one hand, Kubrick is saying technology is allowing the father to travel. And this is something I noticed as Facebook and the internet came online. It was touted as a way for the father to stay in touch no matter how much he traveled. And there were a lot of ads. I'm not sure how many there are anymore, but it would show the dad in a hotel room in some godforsaken place watching his kid kick the winning soccer goal on his iPhone with a smile on his face. And this was presented as the equivalent of being there. It just sort of erased the idea that if he wasn't so far away, he could have gone to the game, like actually been there. And since these gadgets are expensive, then you need to work for them and you may need to travel for them. So there's a way that technology tries to insist that it is the best cure for the problems that it causes. But that can be a real loop, and something that we'll see in the Matrix, a kind of mental loop. And it gets back to the myth of progress and the myth of innovation, which I've certainly talked a lot about in A10. But this idea of forward movement, technological advances are conflated with wisdom, and there's no real connection. It's not that we're getting dumber, it's just that we're not getting wiser. We're not really any wiser than the Greeks 2,000 years ago writing their Greek tragedies, or Shakespeare, or in terms of the human condition. We've kind of, and I think this is a point that Kubrick will famously make, when we have arguably one of the most famous jump cuts in cinema history, and after the dominant ape, who's we typically called Moonwatcher, although that's not in the script, he's the one who's watching the moon when the other apes fall asleep. So some ape with a little extra curiosity or some meta awareness that the other apes don't have. So much so that when he drops a bone on top of other bones, he, having first inspected it for meat, which there isn't any. So for the typical ape, that would be the end of that. The point of a bone is it either does or does not have meat. It's a simple binary. And then the ape would drop the bone back onto a pile of other bones, which also don't have meat. And then there's no other event. So the emergence of even the concept of an event is when this ape, who has this slightly extra meta-awareness gear, which is somehow either represented by, perhaps stimulated by the monolith. It's hard to tell. Kubrick insists on having at least 3 different possibilities over and over again. Arthur C. Clarke, who wrote the short story that was the basis of 2001, in the short story, he's clear that the aliens planted 3 monoliths, one on the Earth, one on the Moon, one on Jupiter, and that they'd set it up so that when the apes activate the monolith on Earth, it activated the monolith on the Moon, and then it took another 4 million years for man to get to the Moon. And when they touch the monolith, it sends out a beam to Jupiter, and so then they organize an expedition to Jupiter to see if they can find this 3rd monolith. Although really, for the humans, they think this is the first monolith, because the apes are obviously in prehistory. There's no recorded, there's nothing recorded about there having been a monolith there first. So that was Clarke's idea. That was his hook, and Kubrick just whittled away at that constantly. Not unlike what he did in The Shining with Stephen King's novel. Like, are they ghosts or are they not? He wants the in-betweenness of it all. and he insists that the monolith I mean, my initial offering to you is the monolith is stumbling into a self-awareness. So there's awareness, such as I should eat the berries off this bush, or I should probably get away from this overhanging rock because there might be a leopard. That's awareness, and and self-awareness is awareness that you're someone who's aware. So in the same way that your dog comes when he's called because you call his name, but he doesn't know that's his name. There isn't that extra awareness that, oh, my name is Buddy. It's more like when I hear that phonetic Buddy, there's either a walk involved or a treat or some food or something. So it's a stimulus. It's a phonetic stimulus. It's not his name. I mean, we think it's his name. We get him a cute collar and engrave it in a little silver thing, and everyone's like, that's such a cute name. But the dog is always just trying to figure out when he hears that phonetics, whether there's how he can align himself with something, and even be scolded, Buddy, get over here, what's the matter with you? And then he's like, Arr. So but it's more like the monolith sending out a beam, like bing, and not the dog doesn't know. I mean, we're monoliths in a way to dogs, in the sense that we're real, we're there. We emit sounds, we emit beams, which seem to be, it's important to pay, the dog learns, it's important to pay attention to the phonetics and respond to the phonetics. It's in his or her best interest. But it doesn't occur to the dog what we are, that we're speaking beings. And if you're having a conversation in front of your dog that doesn't involve the word buddy, the dog will just be lying there quietly looking off, maybe going to sleep. But then if you were to say buddy, then boop, and the ears come up, and it's like you've been talking for an hour and you haven't said anything that it's of any interest, and because it was not the right phonetic arrangement. So in some ways, the apes, it's like the monolith. And only for Moonwatcher, who's already shown a certain interest in, like, I mean, we don't know his thought bubble when he looks up at the moon, but he is looking at the moon, and the other apes are not. And the moon's not something to be seen as an object. So what Moonwatcher seems to stumble into is, and simultaneously, self-awareness is an awareness that you're one thing and other things are something else. Now, if you take it all the way to the Buddhists, that's always a mirage. Like, you aren't one thing and the world is something else. We are all one. And there's a case can be made for that. Certainly at the level of atoms, we are all one. So to a certain extent, the move towards thinking that you're one thing and other things are something else is already technically false, but it creates the beginning of a self, which is an awareness of yourself set against others and objects. And the minute you do that, like we're going to look at the opening scene in a minute, and you can't tell what time it is. I mean, honestly, you don't know. The sun goes up, the sun goes down. The leopard leaps on them. They go to their watering hole. They leave. There's no time. There is geological and astronomical motion, and that's how the movie really begins, with the famous da da. Is actually the planets, and there's an alignment of the planets at the point where the monolith appears. And again, Kubrick fudges the question of obviously, did these planets line up? Do they intend to be aligned? What does that even mean? The planets don't know how to align. It's just that at a certain point, they will align, in almost the same sense that a broken clock is right, quote unquote. But the reality is that the planets didn't align themselves. They were going through their typical gravitationally dictated motions, and then we saw the pattern. Same with constellations. That's Andromeda, and we can develop myths about that. And the beginnings of astronomy was astrology, where there was a lot of mysticism connected to the stars, and then astronomy slowly strips that out. Although ironically, the deeper astronomy goes, the more it seems to be circling back to astrology. I mean, when you listen to the issues with black holes and so on, it starts to sound like, were you born as a Scorpio or a Taurus? I mean, there's a sense where, the immensity of the universe is. The history of astronomy is the history of the discovery that the universe is even more immense than we thought. So you look at Copernicus, and he assumed that our solar system was the universe, and that in fact that the Earth was the center, and the sun and everything else revolved around the Earth, which wasn't true. And so the early astronomers had to come up with all these exceptions to explain why the planets, if the Earth was the center, the movements they were making were not consistent, and they could have figured it out as Galileo, Copernicus first, and then Galileo more specifically, that we're asking the wrong questions. It's not like, how did Venus do that? It's that what Venus did makes sense if you understand that the Earth is not the center of the solar system, that everything is not revolving around the Earth. In fact, the Earth, along with all the other planets, are revolving around the sun. And then suddenly it's actually simpler. The truth is simpler, but the truth didn't accord with Genesis or early myths of God creating heaven and earth, that he created the Earth and he created a sun and a moon to circle the Earth, the sun in the day and the moon at night. And this was, God's plan. So Copernicus was somewhat persecuted, although a lot of people didn't understand what he was saying. And then Galileo was jailed for a while and tried to smuggle his proofs out. And we know what happened with Darwin. So there's what's still happening with Darwin and creationism. So science fiction is the genre. There's very little social relation in science fiction, because science fiction is about immensity. The romance is about intimacy, not immensity. And horror is about immensity, but only as it pertains to our subjective structure. So ghosts, or things that murder us or make us go mad, or cause us to murder. So horror and romance are still personal. There's a degree to which science fiction is not personal anymore. And in fact, by insisting on the immensity of space, it makes us really aware of what a tiny, that cliche that we're just a tiny speck in the universe, that really is a basis for science fiction. And there's an attempt to understand, because when you try and understand our relationship to the universe, one answer to that is there is no relationship. It doesn't matter. Like the Earth itself is a speck, not any more specks on a speck. But it doesn't suffice, because we have this self-awareness. And to some degree, science fiction is, how do we misrecognize the indifferent movement of the spheres in such a way that we can imagine destiny, fate, belief, love, hate, triumph. None of those things make any sense set against the immensity of the universe. So Kubrick comes along. There's already, science fiction's relatively well developed through the 50s, but it's consistently what 1950s science fiction tends to do is say it freely admits that science makes mistakes, and then the purpose of the science fiction is to figure out where it went wrong, go back to that point and start up again, and this time go in the right direction, like away from atomic bombs or whatever the case might be. So there's a redemptive salvational assumption inside standard science fiction up until 2001. It was just assumed that science was the advancing of humankind. And there's plenty of reasons to use scientific development, scientific advancement, as we say, and see it as a way to mark the progress of humanity and of humankind. But what 2001 will do with that famous jump cut, after the ape has discovered that this bone could be used to move other bones, which means that it could be used to crack open the head of the tapir, the large sort of giant gerbil animals that the apes don't even notice. I mean, it's so interesting that they don't see the tapirs as food because they don't know how they would kill them, and so they eat berries all day. And that's in order to stay alive, they don't really have much time to do anything but eat berries. So the discovery that the bone can be a hammer and that you can use leverage immediately supplies meat, raw, which is has immense quantities of energy, fat, protein, which means that you can just eat for an hour and then you've got all this free time, and so the beginning of culture, the beginning of civilization, requires a movement from berries to meat. I mean, sure, we can all be vegan now because we know how to come up with we don't have to literally eat berries all day even when we're vegan. But it's a simple fact that there is no time in the beginning of 2001 because there's no progress, there's no science, there's no self-awareness, there's no development, there's no advancement. Every day is the same as the day before. Even when there is an event, the leopard killing the ape, it's indistinct. It doesn't mark the day. It's not a breakthrough. It's not even a tragedy. It's an event that can happen in the world of predators, and clearly one of the initial advance that science, one of the initial things science does is it begins to offer protection from nature, so that now it's very unlikely that leopards would be allowed to jump on you, certainly not in downtown Toronto, maybe in some mountains far away, but nature has been, like we like to say, tamed. But protecting yourself from predators like a lion or something along those lines doesn't really immunize you to anxiety. In fact, a lot of psychologists have suggested that one reason we have anxiety disorders is that we still evolutionarily, we're still wired to jump a foot if we hear a rustle in the bush, because if we don't react immediately, at least with our ancestors, we would be eaten by a lion. So we still can be wired to be at that level of sensitivity, even though there's no leopards around. And yet we like to assume that our wiring has kept pace with the degree to which we've been able to insulate ourselves from nature. But the wiring hasn't really. We're not that different than apes in terms of our visceral reactions. Jumping when somebody sneaks up behind you and say, "Oh my God, you scared me to death." That we still have that component. So here's the main point, then I want to go to the beginnings of the clip. Everyone thinks science fiction is about gadgets. I want to look at my essay and really look at that carefully, where I work with Heidegger's idea that technology has nothing to do with gadgets. Technology is a mode of thinking, and it defines the human, that we became human when we began thinking in a technological mode. And eventually out of that came technologies, but that's not the point. The iPhone is one of many end results of a way of thinking. And what Kubrick and Heidegger before him, but Kubrick kind of popularizes this, is we need to pay attention to what it means that humanity as we understand it, and our self-awareness as we understand it, is based on shifting into a technological mode of thinking millions of years ago. Because it's both an enormous strength and it's the source of all of our social ills, as we'll see in The Watering Hole. because the rapidity with which society develops. As soon as as soon as the hammer is invented from the bone and the meat is provided, then one ape tribe suddenly is a superior tribe. Now, the idea of one ape tribe being superior to another ape tribe didn't make any sense. We have an earlier watering hole scene with their rival tribes, the two apes, but they can't do anything except throw the same pebbles at each other and jump up and down and make fierce faces. And partly Kubrick was making a parallel with the Cold War, that the fight over the watering hole becomes the Atlantic Ocean. And before the atomic bomb, everybody was relatively equal. The weapons were relatively equal. And then the US suddenly was, for a little while at least, was a superpower with a super weapon, with a bone that could be a hammer. The other apes had not discovered that yet. And it's interesting that Moonwatcher doesn't seem to have been able to, I mean, he's handed meat out to his tribe, but there doesn't yet seem to be education. Nobody else uses the bone. Nobody else, we're at a level where the concept of teaching isn't there. He discovered it now, and he's the one who can do something with this bone. And in a way, it's just as unfathomable to the other apes how this bone works as it is to us how our iPhone works, or our laptop, or our, Amazon Bell ring, or whatever the heck, or the people that talk to us now, Siri and so on, Alexa. We don't know how, most of us don't know how any of that works. We work with it, but we don't know how it works. And when it breaks down, we have no clue, at least I don't, what we're supposed to do about it. And as you probably know, if you've heard my lectures long enough, I keep a little distance from technology. I don't trust it. I don't like to depend on it. I don't want it. I mean, one reason, it's a simple example, I don't use PowerPoint because if I find that and this is just me, I'm not judging everybody, that it draws attention to the apparatus, that it's suddenly I'm not the one who's teaching. The PowerPoint slide is teaching, and I'm there, and my job is to go to the next slide, and suddenly I'm servicing the computer. And this is a tension with Hal. Like, is Hal serving the people on board the ship headed for Jupiter? Yes, but they're completely dependent on Hal. He controls every single part of that ship, and in fact will be able to essentially execute the astronauts who are in deep sleep, who are going to be awakened later. He simply shuts off their life supplies. And when he feels threatened by the fact that they're concerned he may have made a mistake, that Hal could have made a mistake, and since he controls the entire ship, if there's something going wrong with Hal, it could destroy the ship and the mission. Hal has a similar thought, which is that he's already beaten one of the astronauts at chess, and he's realized his prime directive is to preserve the mission at all costs. So it's not really clear whether Hal gains sentience and kills astronauts in self-defense. Does Hal? I mean, this is the question of one of the questions of the movie. Does he move to self-awareness? Is he the Moonwatcher of the latter half of this movie, or is he following his program to the nth and ultimately murderous degree, which is humans are flawed. They are a threat to the program. So they need to be eliminated. You could argue that Hal is following his program. And that's the problem, obviously, with algorithms and programming, is they're not very good. I mean, he can beat people at chess, and computers can now beat the best chess champions. At least I'm not aware of any living chess champion that can beat the best computers anymore, because of the rapidity with which they calculate, for one thing, so that the time frame doesn't work. They can go through 4 million moves and the possible consequences in a couple of seconds, and no grandmaster can match that rapidity of calculation. And they can remember, every single defense ever made against the move you just made, and they can go through all of them, every move. So it's just overwhelming. But what we will see is that Hal doesn't count on the ability of the humans to be counterintuitive. Like, he assumes that the one last astronaut, Dave, that he doesn't want to let back into the ship, won't be able to get back into the ship because he's disabled the methods and the technologies that permit Dave to come back into the ship. What Hal couldn't conceive of is that Dave would repurpose blasting equipment that was intended for something else to blast him across open space and hurl him into the loading bay with such force that he's then able to have the hatch go down before being killed in interstellar space. So let me enough of me for the moment. Let me get this up here. Let's see. Okay, so I gotta share it. Bear with me. I'm gonna share. Hope I don't share so much of this that they block me on the YouTube, but if they do, it seems that it still stays here, and I think possibly on Facebook as well. So I'm going to share application screen, which means I want to share a Chrome tab, and this is the Chrome tab that I want to share. All right, and I'll go large with that, and I'm going to up the volume. And so we're going to hear the beginnings of the famous part of the famous soundtrack of 2001 from a Wagner opera, Thus Spake Zarathustra, and it's it's an image of dawning, dawn of time, the beginning, the dawn of a new day. It's very much about something that begins and something that emerges, and that's the buildup of in the rhythm of the da 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 da, and then bump 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 bump, and you can almost hear the scientific method where you notice something. You notice the moon. You notice the monolith. You notice that the bone moves the bone. So that's the da 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 da, and that's, you have an idea, and then the bump 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 kind of is like, what else, what else, what else? Because after he sees that the bone can move the bones, and then he goes into this frenzy of smashing bones, but that's a breakthrough. But then he has a second breakthrough of realize where Kubrick shows the ape having his first thought, because Kubrick cuts to the image of a tapir rolling over and over again, having been hit on the head. Now that had to be the ape's thought. It's not, because it didn't happen. He imagined that. So now he's gone from awareness of the moon to discovering bones can move bones, and then to imagining if they can move bones, they can move the head of the tapir, and if they can, make the tapir available to eat, it will be a food source far superior to berries. So we'll watch him go through that, and then having had that thought, having imagined killing a tapir, because he hasn't even done it yet, he has a moment of triumphant glee that he really has discovered. It's like he split the atom, or he discovered electricity, or any of the famous discoveries that we like to talk about, invented the wheel, or whatever it might be, and he hurls the bones up into the sky in a kind of ecstasy, and then that bone turns and turns and doesn't come down, and it becomes the first of the space stations that is circling the moon. So in one cut, Kubrick jumps 4 million years, and that's, to me, that's the central genius of the whole movie, is that he both honors the concept of advancement. We went from bones to space shuttles, and also says they're the same thing. We're still apes, and we're still inventing bones that are hammers. It's just now they're spaceships, and we're not any more advanced than these tribal apes, and just as likely to destroy ourselves. So that, and this is the height of the Cold War, when many people were thinking that. So let's have a look. See what I mean? This is an alignment, Earth, Moon, and Sun, And of course, we know the earliest Druids, some of the earliest religions that we can even find evidence for, they did worship the sun. And whether it's Easter Island or Stonehenge or some of the weird domes in Ireland, one of the first things religion does is finds a way to orient itself to celestial alignment, and presuming that this is the manifestation of God. So that's what this would look like. And there are earthen domes in Ireland that on this summer solstice, through a tiny aperture in the stone, that the sun comes in and just once a year and illuminates the inside. And this would have been a holy day. And the entire structure of really one of the first churches is to allow that sun to come through in perfect alignment. So there's a lot about alignment, but what Kubrick draws attention to is, are we noticing alignment, or are we aligning ourselves? And one thinks of Godot and Lucky and all the rest of it here, but that's for A11. But we're putting ourselves in the sunbeam so that we can be aligned with something that we then can see not just as greater than ourselves, but notice the importance of the alignment is that it suggests that there's a pattern to the immensity. And that's why most of our myths are designed to suggest that the alignment has meaning, because then the immensity is manageable. And this is when you hear people say, oh, one day we'll be able to go to the moon, one day we'll be able to go to Mars, even if the Earth ceases to be viable, by then we will have figured out. And there's that kind of movement too. But Kubrick really warns against that. And in fact, we do know that many religious groups that left evidence of their religions disappeared. And it could have been war, it could have been disease, it could have been a combination, but it didn't turn out to be salvational in the larger scheme of things. I think, going through this pandemic right now, one of the few things we have are statistics. I mean, the New York Times, and I have no problem with this. I look at them myself, and I'm interested. The graphs, they're unbelievable what they come up with. How many new cases, how many people recovered, how many in ICU, how many here, how many there, how many ventilators do we need? This is all valid, but it's also seen as like the only reaction to the coronavirus is to meet it, is to make it statistical, and so we chart how many die, and it allows us to impose order on the chaos, because the coronavirus is not an intentional thing. It's not intending to kill us. It's not intending to not kill us. It's even the variants and the way that it mutates is a kind of an emerging, but it's an emerging without intention. And by imposing pattern, we try to generate a myth of emergence with intention. So the book of Genesis is clear that God intended to make the earth. And first he separated the land and the water. Well, first he put the sun in the sky, and then the earth and the land and the water, and then the animals. And there's all this intention behind it. And that's where Darwin was such a shock, because he was saying evolution is both precise and random. There is evolution's an emergence, but there is no sentient, omniscient intention behind it. It could go this way, it could zig, or it could zag. So we have the marsupials in Australia, but not elsewhere, because Australia, for the most part, was an island. The animals evolved in Australia. They didn't cross land masses. And the Galapagos Islands are another case made famous by Darwin. So here's this alignment. So notice how that the emergence, the rise of the sun, and there's a perfect alignment of all three. This will be repeated with the monolith. The sun will come up over the edge of the monolith. And of course, the first clock that we know of was having a metal bar on a circle, on a metal circle, to cast a shadow, and then the shadow would move around the circle. And this was a way to divide to translate the movement of the sun across the sky and divide it into 12 segments and have the first hours. Of course, we can't put a clock like that on our wrist, and it can't denote seconds. But it's sundial is what it was called, and it was very much an analog. Whereas now we have digital clocks, and we have nuclear, and they can do tenths of a second and hundredths of a second. But the division of time into tinier and tinier increments, and the miniaturization of timekeeping devices so that individuals can have them on their phone is basic to modernity. You can't have trains leaving at 6:07 if no one knows when 6:07 is, and no sundial is going to be precise enough. You literally could not have trains or airplanes or anything else on a schedule. Okay, so then that's the sort of the overture, and let's just wait for this. We can hear. Okay, here we go. So this is kind of almost a jump cut in a different way, because this seems to be sunrise. So we just saw sunrise in terms of immensity, and now we see sunrise as it would be from the perspective of simply being on Earth. And remember how it happened when night started. It started. Movies typically start with an establishing shot, and so you have a picture of the yacht from far away, and then halfway to the yacht, and then on the deck of the yacht, and you're like, okay, fine, this movie is beginning, and I'm on a yacht. There's almost no establishing shots anywhere in 2001. That is probably the most definitive thing we can say about its uniqueness, and because Kubrick is saying point of view is an invention, intention is an invention, direction is an invention, advancement is an invention. There is no such thing as an establishing shot. There is only continuity, and then we divide up the continuity and we declare a beginning. So that say the beginning of the day, but it's not really the beginning of the day. It's where the Earth is turning. Nothing begins, nothing ends. It just turns, and that's intolerable to having a sense of self and putting your self-awareness into more and more complicated arrangements by opposing the otherness around you, and then controlling that otherness. But the danger of that, of course, is you forget that you're still of that otherness, that we too are a part of nature. We are, as has been said, there are no passengers on planet Earth. We're all a part of it, and we're still animal. We're still biological, and we can still poison ourselves or shoot ourselves or poison ourselves. So this is not an establishing shot. This is like, who knows when this is. And what's a little eerie about 2001 is once you've seen this opening with the apes and everything, and then you go into the jump cut, and now you're in the super calculated world of 2001 as imagined from 1968. It's hard to forget there's something artificial and antiseptic and static about this precise world, despite its considerable accomplishments. It's as if, another way to chart the movement. There isn't much plot in 2001, not really, except a little bit that Hal tries to take over. Dave just takes apart his memory, continues to, and goes through some kind of stargate, arrives in Jupiter, and has a strange hallucinogenic walk through his own mortality. Somehow goes through the monolith, and it becomes a gigantic star baby. very hard ending to read, as Kubrick worked very hard to make sure that ambivalence. I mean, Kubrick is the genius of ambivalence. He loves it, and he works it in so astutely that you can't stop trying to figure it out. But that's because he thought cinema was mystical. He thought cinema could return the modern mind to mysticism, to an awareness that there's more going on than we can comprehend, no matter how capable we are of comprehending. So we go from shot to shot, and these aren't point of view shots, because there's no counter shot of who's looking. There's nobody looking. There's a blankness to the camera, just and it's not the eye of God. There's no sense of transcendence in these shots. It's sort of documentary style. And then we come into the first scene of the apes and the tapirs, and notice how they're coexisting. Neither sees the relevance of the other. The tapirs, they're not really competitive. The tapirs want the grass, and if the ape thinks there might be some berries in the grass, he'll chase the tapir away, because he wants the berries and the tapir wants the leaves. So they have to work that out. And you can see the apes in the foreground grooming each other. But they're essentially coexisting. And yet this pile of bones, this will be the site, and this is the leopard. And you can see their fear and the demise of this ape, and we get a fade out. And here's the watering hole. And you can see they're clustered together. There's some attempt at safety. Most of the communication is not so much, is really just territorial. Don't get too close. Although there is grooming, there is care being taken one to another. Then we'll see one of the rival apes coming in to see, because they have to, and on one level they need to share this watering hole. So this scene is important, so that it'll set up the next scene later when the bone is there, because, and then we'll essentially get the first murder, because the leopard does not murder an ape. He secures food, but the first murder will be when the bone is used ape to ape. And it's not about food, it's about territory. And then the only difference between a tool and a murder weapon is your intent. So there isn't much they can do. They both scream ferociously at what they're going to do to each other, or how they would tear each other limb from limb, and neither can really It's strange that there's such. Sooner or later, these apes will either leave this watering hole, and the other tribe can come along, or the other tribe will find their own watering hole. Okay, so let's go forward a little, not quite that much. Okay, so here's this is Moonwatcher. So you can see he gets the first point of view shot in the movie, if you want to call it that. But again, you can't be sure it doesn't feel like a point of view shot. And then the night, and they're asleep. And now there's this noise. And again, Moonwatcher's the first. He's simply more alert. And what's interesting is that he's able to subdue his threat reaction enough to allow curiosity to emerge. This is another thing that makes. Now he does wake up his colleagues here, if you will. But he isn't just frightened. There's a little bit of him that is feeling a sense of emergence in himself, and obviously the monolith is a definition of something that emerges. The difference being, of course, it's fully emergent. They came upon it finished somehow. And the monolith, it doesn't vary the whole movie. Nobody seems to be able to break it open or change it or do anything with it. So with the Moon Watcher as leader, they overcome their fear, and he leads the way to curiosity. And notice how they're interested in the edges. It's not a rock, and it suggests that there's more to the shape of things than the shape they happen to be. The idea that you might be able to shape them, and here comes the sun, and you can still see the moon. And my sense is that Moonwatcher would notice that. Now, and then we go back to really a shot much like, these are just like the beginning of the movie again, these random shots from different angles of who knows what. We can't locate ourselves. These are disorienting shots that refuse to be establishment shots. But now we're back to a shot we had earlier, and here's the pile of bones. So this is the same day as any other day, and here you can see Kubrick starting to set up the frame here. Remember the idea of the imaginary plenitude of the frame. The fact that this frame, this ape's center frame, is already allowing this ape to emerge as a proto-human. We're basically going to watch him become human in this scene, specifically through adopting a technological mode of thinking, and it distinguishes him from certainly from all the other apes, but in fact from all animals. And this is at least Kubrick's attempt to show us, when did we take a step out of the animal kingdom toward humanity? And it's a triumph, and it's also a kind of a curse that we traded something. Instead of this kind of unassuming feeling of being one with all around us, including the dangers of leopards, we get this incredible gift of being capable of seeing ourselves as opposed to things, which is all right. But when you look at global warming and pollution and atomic war and so on, that there's an irrationality in the human condition that can take this otherness and construe it now as power, because there's really not much point in talking about power. And you've heard me talk about it, how power is an effective relationship, but there is no power in the movie yet, because no one has any leverage, literally, in terms of the bone or anything else. So there's no government, there's no politics, there's no economics. And yet all of that's going to happen as soon as he notices that the bone can move other bones. Right now he's looking for food. There's nothing different, but something. Now he remembers. See, that was a memory. He remembered the way the sun bisected the monolith. He remembered the alignment. So now he's gone from foraging for food, and he's seeing the bones through new eyes. He's seeing the bones qua bones, seeing the bones as bones. There's a meta quality to this second look that he gives the bones. It's not yet the invention of a bone as a hammer. It's just it's a sense of curiosity that if the sun can be cut in half by an object, then there are such things as objects. And now the bones are not just bones, they're objects. And you can see the turn of the head. He's adjusting the angle of his sight, which wouldn't make any sense if he was still just foraging. He's not foraging anymore, he's thinking. And we can see that part of what thinking is looking at things from multiple angles. But you have to be aware that a thing is a thing before it makes any sense to adjust your angle toward it, or before it makes any sense that there's any potential payoff. for looking at something from multiple angles. And it's looking at things from multiple angles that creates point of view, because now you're making choices. I can look at the bone this way, I can look at the bone that way, I can move around, I can lean back. I now can adjust my point of view, and that means you have one. Of course, the music starts to come in, which probably isn't in the ambient shot of what the ape is hearing, but we will see that there's a thought that's emerging, like bones are things. How are bones also not bones? If there are bones, you can't know there's bones if you don't know what isn't a bone. So it's not yet language, but it's the beginning of signifier signified, where these are bones, that is dirt, these are my hands, this is a weapon. This is where language will come in to keep track of the relationship between self and other, self and object. So now the adjustment of the posture and of the point of view. He doesn't know. This is curiosity. This is not discovery at this point, because discovery is when your curiosity seems to uncover a pattern. Technology is a way of uncovering, which is to say it's a way of seeing more. It's a way of seeing into, but it's narrower than we think. And it can lead, as it has in modernity, to a very strict utilitarian point of view, all the way as we move to economics. Like, is it monetizable? So there's a use function going on now. And once you've turned over your sense of otherness as what use is it, that's very different from what am I, what is my, not even my relationship to it. I mean, they're aware of the leopard, for instance, but only because the leopard occasionally kills one or more of them. Other than that, they have no sense of what to do. They're not hunting the leopard. So that's a distinctive moment. He lets the bone drop. You hear the click, tick, and he sees the bone hit another bone. And that's causality. And he's the first ape to ever notice that something could cause something else. Now, did this bone cause anything? Yeah, it caused him to notice a connection. The bone didn't cause anything, but it caused him to have a thought. And this is the imposition of the technological mode of how does one thing affect another, and how can you position yourself? How can you align yourself in relation to that for maximum leverage? And another distinct moment where he gives another pat, and this time he essentially sees the first effective leveraging. That the force he's able to bring down causes that bone to fly up into the air. It's also curved, so it's the beginning of understanding levers. Now that second tap was fairly unpromising, so you need a bit of persistence. A lesser ape might have decided, oh, I guess this isn't anything because I just did it again and nothing happened. But he clearly remembers it. Wait, I did it and something happened. Then I did it again and then nothing happened. What's the difference? What do I have? How do I have to do this so I can have the thing happen and not do it so that nothing happens? Now you get that hero shot, shot from below as the arm rises up over his shoulder, because this has just been wrist action so far. So now there's a kinesiology that he's discovering leverage. This is the beginning of physics. Not that he could tell you, he couldn't give you the mathematical formula for how much more pounds per square inch he'll be able to exert with the bone, because he's now raising it up using his whole shoulder. But it is what he's discovering, that how can I make these bones move more dramatically? I'll bring the bone down with more force. And how can I do that? Well, within the limits of my own anatomy. And Kubrick changed the shot now. It's at ground level, and the ape is towering, is dominating the bones, and that we see a bone flying up. Notice his eyes don't follow the bone that's flying up. He's interested in the dynamic, not the result, and that's the other strength of the scientific method. It doesn't get distracted by the effect when it's trying to explore the common denominator of the cause. So he keeps his eye on the point where the bone makes contact with the other bones, and because once the bone flies up and off into the air, it's no longer a part of the dynamic that he's trying to master. In the use of both hands. So he's just exponentially increasing the force, and his eyes have moved to the skull over here, because up until now he's been moving these bones around. And had he started with the skull, not with the little wrist taps, nothing, he might not have learned anything. So he wasn't ready for the skull. And in a way, you can almost imagine the thought here, which is, if I use both hands and my abdomen and the weight of my leg, can I break open this? And that will lead to yet another thought, which may not quite be formed yet, which is, what, this is dead, obviously, there's no meat on this, but what if this was the head of the tapir that has meat? So you see how quickly Kubrick does this 3-cut, almost Hitchcockian. The skull implodes, a tapir rolls over, and certainly the look here is ferocious, but also triumphant. And this is, in Freudian terms, this is the beginning of sublimation, where you take all that rage that we saw earlier, they're going hopping around to no effect, and now he is sublimating that rage into production, bringing this, using just as much rage, using the strength of anger. But when you use the strength of anger strategically, it becomes drive, it becomes ambition. Back to the shot of the tapir. So he doesn't, we don't get the jump cut yet, and we go back to these undifferentiated shots, but now we're going to go back to the watering hole. And now he has the bone. And that is the beginning of civilization. Hits the ape on the head. The ape rolls over, doesn't know what happened. Nobody knows what happened. I don't even think Moonwatcher knows what happened. So notice, Moonwatcher is the only one who is doing this. To the others, he's in another zone. They're watching. The rival tribe is horrified that one of their own members is immobile, and Moonwatcher's tribe is galvanized. But neither tribe has any conception of how this was done. So Moonwatcher is still ahead of the curve, but he can't explain the dynamic. He's inhabiting the dynamic, and it's a combination of curiosity, anger, ambition, drive. Now, these extra hits are beginning to be, because it's pretty clear that the ape is dead. Now it's an assertion of dominance. That extra pounding that he just did is, there are more. I can continue to hit you. I can hit you. Who's next? Now we do see one guy over here who's picked up another bone now. Not clear that he knows what to do with it. He's imitating Moonwatcher, and they're all holding bones. Now here comes the cut. To the space station. I'll point out to you, this is beautiful, and he uses the music of the waltz, but there's still not an establishing shot. Everything is moving in relation to everything else. The Earth is turning, the space shuttle is going through space. This movie constantly returns us to the fact that there is no originating point. We create originating points, but they don't exist apart from our psychological design. We're back to the immensity of the universe, but the waltz is immense too. It's splendid, and it seems to offer a way to align ourselves with immensity, the immensity of a feeling inside ourselves. This is moving toward the moon. So there's a suggestion there that out of the emergence of the technological mode, there is a lot that still exists behind it. One of them is rhythm, the rhythm of the heartbeat, bum, 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 bum. And of course, the waltz is a balletic arrangement of rhythm. And rhythm seems an important part of discovery, but it isn't necessarily the part that's honored by the scientific method. The scientific method, in order to improve itself, must compartmentalize more and more severely the gap between executing in a so-called neutral manner and the humanity that is still behind that. I want to just cut to by contrast. You can see how much these look like movie screens. They're waiting. They're waiting for their briefing, and after that beautiful waltz and the movement and the gorgeousness of the space shuttles moving, we're going to jump. This is like a watering hole meeting. These are like the tribes. They're gathered around the watering hole, and now they're going to be told that we found this monolith, and we don't want the Russians to know. And you can see the politics. The Russians are the other apes. And they're going to make up a story about a weird epidemic that has broken out, and that's why no one is allowed to go to that part of the moon. To do this because the moon doesn't belong to any one nation. Something Trump was messing around with when he said he wanted a space force and begin to politicize space, even though there are several treaties that say nobody owns the moon. That's there are plenty of treaties that were, nobody owns Wyoming or Montana, and as soon as it suited people to own it, then the treaty was worthless. So I think we're still at a point where we would say nobody owns the moon, but we know enough about geopolitics that no one owns the moon because no one has seen the advantage of what's the point of owning it. We did plant a flag on it, but most people just allowed that as a souvenir, and that we weren't claiming. It wasn't Columbus, although Columbus is a common name for both spaceships and other exploratory devices.
Well, I know you will all want to join with me in welcoming our distinguished friend and colleague from the National Council of Astronautics, Dr. Haywood Floyd. Now, Dr. Floyd has come up specially to Clavius to be with us today.
So this is the bloodlessness of this, and the three blank screens and the low concrete ceiling. Seeing that the two flags, the space flag and the United States of America, there's an incredible dimension to bring all of this wonder to a focalized point, so that maximum leverage can be discussed and maintained. And who knows what this monolith is, but and in the back of everyone's mind, among other things, is it weaponizable? And it does suggest, the degree to which modern governments have a vested interest in approaching everything from a point of view of how does this threaten our security? How does this shore up our security? How does this give us means to threaten other people's security? And there's that three-pronged approach to anything that the government comes upon. So in some ways, this is an example, not unlike the ape, of saying, here's a bone, it moves other bones. I wonder if it could kill a tapir. I wonder if it could kill another ape. I now own this watering hole. Ownership was an impossible thing to conceive. Even when the other apes scared off the apes by shouting at them, that wasn't a posture of ownership. They didn't have security guards, policing. They didn't have a boundary. They didn't have policing. They were there and they were being loud, and the other apes went away to try and find their quote unquote own watering hole. But nobody can really assert ownership. For the most part, space is just space in the first part of the movie with the apes. And later we realize even when space becomes place, that place is always simply a temporary, sustaining a temporary position against space. Space is always coming back into place. So I'm going to skip through that part, and I have to jump ahead, especially in the interest of time. This is where the astronaut has been sent out to check an antenna that Hal has predicted will fail in exactly, I don't know, whatever it is he says. But the astronaut can't find anything wrong with it. And that's the beginning of their suspicions that there could be something wrong with Hal, and he controls everything, and they may need to decommission Hal and take over the project manually. Kubrick was pioneering computer graphics in cinema, basically, in these scenes, even though they're pretty routine now. And you can see the eye of Hal watching them as they test the piece that he said was approaching failure. So each time they probe it, it's coming up as secure. And this is an emergent thought on his part, and on his part too. We can't find anything wrong with it. Hal said there was something wrong with it. They probably expected to find something wrong with it. And now they have a dilemma because Hal's not supposed to be capable of mistakes, and within the narrow band of algorithm, he perhaps can't make mistakes. This is where and this is another ambivalence Kubrick will not let us break into, and that is Hal coming into self-awareness. Because one of the things that happens when you come into self-awareness is you make mistakes. This is another reason computers can beat people at chess. People get tired. People make a mistake. They don't notice the bishop in the corner or something, and they lose the piece. There's human error, as we call it. And arguably, in order to become more human, if Hal is starting to have feelings, he's going to also start making mistakes, which one could, you could argue that that's an advance, that Hal is moving into authentic AI. And the price of that, you cannot have self-awareness and perfection. Because self-awareness, by definition, is keeping track of more things than you can keep track of, and plotting courses through everything in a manner that can't possibly take account of everything.
Well, Hal, I'm damned if I can find anything wrong with it.
Yes. It's puzzling. I don't think I've ever seen anything quite like this before. I would recommend that we put the unit...
I think that statement is more momentous than we might occur. I do not think I've seen anything like this before. That's Hal becoming aware of time. I mean, he used the word before. What does before mean to a computer? I mean, he's talking as though he's got a past. He's talking as though he has, well, that he has memory, and not just in a technical sense. He's experiencing differentiation. He is becoming. It's unclear how he's becoming more human. Some have argued that Hal is really the one more influenced by the emergence of the second monolith. That the emergence of the second monolith is a new age of man, and Hal theoretically could be a part of that. Although in the end he's taken apart by Dave, but then goes through the Stargate and seems to go back into the beginning. Goes back to a modality before the technological. That may be something like what the Star Baby indicates. Because I mean, if nothing else, the Star Baby is an incredible image of origin, to go back into the embryonic state. And it might be that the other side of technology is to realize that you've gone as far as you can with the thinking in the technological mode, and that the next stage of man, if there's going to be one, will have to be to go all the way back to that technological origin with everything that it has allowed, but then find a way to shed the technological modality, which will be something like a return to the mystical, but not necessarily to the non-technological, but to come full circle, retain everything technology has allowed us, and somehow return to the mysticism the technology effaced.
Back in operation and let it fail. It should then be a simple matter to track down the cause. We can certainly afford to be out of communication for the short time it will take to replace it.
X-ray Delta 1, this is Mission Control. Roger, your 1930. We concur with your plan to replace number 1 unit to check fault.
Okay, so I'm jumping ahead again. Hal has directed the space module to cut the air hose of Dave's colleague, essentially killing him, because they thought that Hal couldn't hear them. They went inside the space module to confer when the antenna did not fail, and they decide among themselves that Hal need to be disconnected. but Hal reads their lips. So you can see that red eye glowing, and he can't hear them because they found the one part of the ship where he doesn't have audio, but he's able to read the lips. Now, arguably is not a technological function. There's something about Hal that's becoming sentient, and he is feeling threatened, and that is pushing him beyond the boundaries. There's nothing in his program to tell him to read lips. He must be repurposing, optical programs or I don't know what all. He's not programmed to read lips, but he's got more than enough capacity if he rearranges it. So this is the beginning of sentient counterintuitive thinking. Now, Dave is back, and he needs to re-enter the main space ship. And Kubrick loves to use that angled, the head angled down, and the gaze, and simply the eyes moving up. He uses it a lot in Full Metal Jacket, but it's also here. It's also a little like the sun peeking over the top of the monolith. He's also thinking now, and he's realizing that it wasn't an accident that the astronaut is dead. He'll just forget if he knows in this scene yet that the other astronauts in deep sleep are also dead. So there's, a kind of convergence. Kind of reminds me of that moment in Get Out where she says, "I can't give you the car keys, right, babe?" A kind of Dave moment. He's trying to figure out how to he's doing the usual things to get back in to the spaceship, and they're not malfunctioning. Hal is functioning to make them inoperative. So he uses the explosive bolts to hurl himself through space, and now is able to hang on while the hatch closes. Now he's on his way to dismantle Hal.
Just what do you think you're doing, Dave? Dave, I really think I'm entitled to an answer to that question.
Now, notice how does a computer say, "I really think I'm entitled to an answer to that question"? In what way is a computer entitled to an answer to any question? So I think this is Hal in a kind of sentient mode. He's learning as he goes, and he can tell that Dave is making progress toward the nerve function, the brain of Hal, the memory banks of Hal.
everything hasn't been quite right with me.
Again, a sense of time. Everything hasn't been quite right with me. And notice that Dave is not taking off. He doesn't trust Hal. He's treating the inside of the spaceship, which should be a safe zone, as hostile. He knows that Hal has access to a lot of ways to potentially kill Dave inside the spaceship by allowing certain systems to be breached.
But I can assure you now, very confidently, that it's going to be all right again.
There's, Hal is scrambling to engage Dave in conversation, which is kind of astonishing in its own right. Like, how does a computer engage you into wanting to talk and to persuading you and lying to you, to be honest? I mean, this is how lying at this point, saying, I can say this with the utmost confidence. Notice he uses the techno speak that was, for a long time, that was his bragging rights. Like, if Hal said, this problem is complex, I can assure you it will be all right, previous to what we've seen, that would have been treated at face value. Like, the computer said they're sure this is all right. This is not going to lead to a bigger breach. That's what Hal's supposed to do. That's what Hal's supposed to know. And it's the computer's ability to say that, and to say it with confidence, and to be right, that even makes space travel possible, which is dangerous enough without having as much certainty. So he's employing techno-speak, like, I assure you as a computer who's never wrong that this is going to be fine. But he's actually talking about human relationship. Like, you don't have to hurt me. And really, this is where it begins to move toward, don't hurt me, don't kill me, as opposed to don't unplug me.
I feel much better now. I really do.
And what does it mean when a computer feels better? The computer is either broken or it's not. He's really talking about mood and anger and reconciliation and all these emotional registers.
Look, Dave.
So now he's beginning to release.
I can feel it.
I can feel it. Again, not something you'd expect a computer to say. Typically, I mean, if you want to pull out the memory banks of your laptop's not going to say, I can feel it. You can't feel it. What does it mean that Hal says that you can? And very soon he's going to move to another emotion.
Afraid.
I'm afraid. What does it mean when a computer feels fear? It means that a diminishment in technological capacity is now being registered as an approach toward death and not malfunction. Hal is afraid of dying. He's not concerned about malfunction. If Hal were still in a computer mode, he would be saying, I should, like, we get these warnings on our laptops all the time, like, don't adjust this, don't throw out that, or your iOS is going to break down. The computer will warn us to not break it, but it doesn't have any stake in it. It's programmed to tell us which of our actions might break it, but not from any point of self-preservation. This is really a computer moving into a feeling of self-preservation. I can feel it. I'm afraid. Please don't.
Good afternoon, gentlemen. I am a HAL 9000 computer.
This is the technical equivalent of dementia. That Hal is finding that he doesn't have the reach anymore to be present in the moment, and that he's retreating to the last things he can remember with clarity. In this case, his inception when he first came online.
I became operational at the HAL plant in Urbana, Illinois on the 12th of January, 1992. My instructor was Mr. Langley, and he taught me to sing a song. If you'd like to hear it, I can sing it for you.
Yeah, I'd like to hear it, Hal.
Now that's the first thing Dave has said to him, and Dave is feeling guilty. He is feeling like he's killing something. He feels justified, and reasons to feel justified, but it's still not very fun to listen to something die because of what you're doing, which is very different feeling than unplugging it. So in a moment, it's partly mercy toward Hal. Let you go ahead and sing your song, the Daisy song, the first song he was taught back in 1992 by his inventor, Mr. Langley. Well, that'll pass the time until your consciousness is completely extinguished, and it will make it a little less hard. It'll make it a little easier for me, so that I don't have to listen to, as you narrate your mounting fear and despair.
Sing it for me.
It's called Daisy. Daisy, Daisy, give me your answer too. I'm half crazy, all for the love of you. It won't be a stylish marriage. I can't afford a couch.
Good day, gentlemen. This is a pre-recorded briefing.
So as soon as Hal is dead, so to speak, there is somebody put in a fail-safe. This is Hayward Floyd, the same guy we saw in the earlier scene with the white screens. It's that if Hal fails, Hal knew the mission. He knew the mission was to get to Jupiter. The people on board didn't actually know, because the technicians programmed Hal to know. But now if Hal's gone, they put in a special recording that the astronauts, or in this case there's only one left, be told what the mission is.
Made prior to your departure. And maturity reasons of the highest importance has been known on board during the mission only by your HAL 9000 computer. Now that you are in Jupiter's space and the entire crew is revived, it can be told to you.
Now, of course, this is wrong, and they're not in Jupiter. The team is not revived. There's been an utter breakdown in the mission, but nonetheless, this will point the way toward taking manual control. And we then get this remarkable 24-minute cinematic odyssey through space and time. We get close-ups of Dave's eyes. At times he seems in danger of passing out. And I'm going to cut to where he finally seems to land, having come to the Stargate, and he's clearly aged quite a bit in 24 minutes in cinematic viewing time. Now again, Arthur C. Clarke had the idea in the Sentinel, the short story, is that the aliens had set up a room at the end of the Stargate to try and help make the astronauts welcome, but they have at best it's a kind of collage of human history. So you can see 18th century paintings, you can see Greek culture here. This is more 1780s, 1790s furniture. So it's a mishmash. Later you'll see a modern toilet. That none of these things could have coexisted at the same time. And it does make the point yet again that in our sense of history, that 300 years is a long time, that 500 years is a long time. These aliens, if they exist, can't distinguish between the 18th century and the 20th century. We haven't made that much progress at all. So it's not even discernible. Now, typical Kubrick, that's Clark. Kubrick will allow that possibility of the interpretation I just gave you, but he's also doing the subjective point of view of whether this is a scrambled approximation of Dave trying to get oriented in a place beyond space and time. Kind of shades of The Shining. You can see him warming up for that with the shrieky voices. So now he's going into a second room where he's going to encounter what would appear to be another person. And of course, on viewing this the first time, one would assume, well, maybe we'll get some answers. This guy must know something. But this guy's just an older version of Dave. And this is going to happen. Each person he meets here is an older version of himself. And you can see that Kubrick is kind of closing up that loop that he's been insisting on the whole movie, which is we're going to have to move outside the 100% technological modality of seeing ourselves in opposition to otherness. There's no otherness in this room. Every other that he meets is an older version of him. And it does suggest on an almost poetic basis that we have an otherness in ourselves. Like our 15-year-old self is not our 30-year-old self, is not our 60-year-old self, and it is not ourself, in our final minutes of life. Those are all others, even though they're all also us. And there's a suggestion here that we really need to begin to wonder about ourselves. And the long trip of dominating otherness has come to the end of its useful function. We can't take it any further without extinguishing ourselves. So we're going to have to get outside the technological mode, drop the self-other opposition, take a journey into ourselves. And there he is, quite elderly, and here he is on his deathbed. And there's the monolith again. And here, Clark said, I don't even know what this monolith is. This was all Kubrick. And at this point, I think the theological implications was it an alien? Was it a god? Or is it our awareness of the only limitation science can never dominate, our mortality? That when we can pass on our learning so that when we die, others can continue our work. But the original monolith appeared shortly after a death scene, shortly after the leopard mauled one of the apes and they were crowding in fear of death. And yet another possibility with the monolith is its materialization of wanting to be able to do something in relation to our mortality, and that can to create religion, to create science, to create economics. It's the three largest dominant discourses of the last couple of centuries. It also looks, by the way, like a movie screen. And we've been watching this on a movie screen, and I think Kubrick felt that the cinema was the most mystical art form yet. That it had the capacity to generate things that were above and beyond itself. Now that's a rather famous countershot, the view of the monolith, and he's a baby in embryo, sort of popularly called a star child, but not. And here comes the emergent music again, and we're going to disappear into the screen, and so it'll be black. And immediately the moon, what you saw, the earth. So what's the emergent thought here? You know, the first time we heard this song was that opening where the moon and the earth and the sun moved into alignment. And now we have the moon and the earth and the star child, who seems to be almost equivalent. So there's a sense of being on the death is the verge, of a rebirth. But it's going to have to be a rebirth of juxtaposition and not of alignment. It's going to be we're going to have to see ourselves as equivalent to the immensity of the universe. That we are, that in ourselves contain an immensity that we normally try and reassure ourselves against by dominating otherness. But there is an infinity to looking inward. In classic Kubrick, one eye is bright, looking, I don't know if optimistic is too strong a word. The other eye is in shadow, and that's always been the case. And possibly, arguably, this could be the eye of science. This could be the eye of the mystical. That this eye is in shade now. And of course, we've been watching these celestial bodies create light and shade from the very beginning of this movie. And it's important to, when things go into the shade, notice what comes into the light. And when things come into the light, notice what's put into the shade. You can't have light without shade, and you can't have shade without light. And there's a tendency sometimes to want to control the light and banish the shadow. But as Yeats said, we need to lie down where all the ladders start, in the foul rag and bone shop of the heart. And that was the end. I mean, you can imagine being in 1968, sitting in the theater, having watched that whole movie, wondering, how is this going to end? How can this end? And arguably, it doesn't end. There's no beginning to this movie. There's no end to this movie. This is about the relationship of emerging self-awareness to an immensity that both threatens to extinguish that self-awareness and invites that self-awareness to emerge further. So let's go back to me. And stop sharing if I can figure this out. Okay, so I think we're back to me, right? Just so I can say goodbye. I've an elderly star child, one-eyed shaved, one-eyed late. All right, I think it's probably been a long lecture. It's a long movie. It's a big movie. And I hope you have a good week. I'm too tired to figure out when I'll see you again, but I'm sure it will happen. Okay.